The price was low enough to ignore the warnings. 6 months ago, we moved into the bungalow, convinced we had found a steal. The first week was a blur of activity. We hauled boxes through the front door, wiped dust from baseboards, and painted every room a clean, bright white. It felt like a fresh start. By the second week, the silence of the house began to settle in. I decided to build a bookshelf for the hallway. I gripped the tape measure, hooked the end against the corner, and pulled the steel ribbon taut. I marked the floor. I measured the exterior wall from the porch, then walked back inside to verify the interior span. The numbers did not align. I checked again, my thumb pressing hard against the metal catch. There was a 4-foot gap missing from the floor plan. I paced the hallway, counting my steps, staring at the blank wallpaper that stretched between the living room and the kitchen. The math was impossible. I measured the exterior again, then the interior, then the exterior once more. The gap remained. It was a void in the architecture, a space that should have existed but simply did not. I stood in the center of the hallway, the tape measure dangling from my hand, and listened. The house did not groan. I woke up at 3 a.m., my throat dry, the house silent. I walked into the hallway, my eyes adjusting to the dark. I stopped dead. A plain white door stood flush against the wall where there had been nothing but flat plaster hours before. It had no handle and no frame. I stood there for a full minute, my hand hovering over the wood, feeling a cold vibration. I pushed. The door swung open without a sound. Inside, the air was heavy, bathed in a sickly, stagnant yellow light. A bed was perfectly made. Wooden blocks and dolls lay scattered on the rug as if abandoned mid-play. I stepped inside, my heart hammering. On the wall hung framed portraits of my wife and me. We were flanked by 2 children we never had. We looked radiant, yet in every single frame, our eyes were stitched shut with thick, black thread. I stared at the needlework. I slammed the door shut, backed away until I hit the opposite wall, and sat on the floor until the sun finally bled through. The next morning, I hired a contractor. He arrived with a sledgehammer and a look of professional boredom. I pointed to the spot where the door had been. He swung the hammer. Plaster shattered. Dust filled the air, and he smashed through the drywall until he hit the wooden studs. Behind the wall, there was nothing but rotting insulation and empty space. No room, no door. He laughed, wiped sweat from his brow, and left me standing in the debris. I spent the afternoon patching the hole, convinced I had finally lost my mind. But the house was not finished. That night, the door returned. This time, it was different. A polished brass knob sat in the center of the wood, catching the moonlight. I reached out, my fingers trembling, and gripped the cold metal. I turned it. A sound spilled out the high-pitched, rhythmic laughter of children. It was not coming from the room behind the wood. It was vibrating through the hallway, echoing from deep inside our own walls. Last Tuesday, I was home alone. The temperature in the hallway plummeted, the air turning sharp and biting against my skin. I watched as the wood grain of the wall began to warp, twisting inward until the door materialized once more. It stood solid, a barrier between my reality and the void. From the darkness behind the wood, a voice drifted out. It was my wife's voice, clear and inviting, cutting through the silence. "Come play with us, honey. The room is ready for you now." I backed away, my heels scraping against the floorboards, but the house groaned in response. Then, the rhythm changed. A new sound emerged from the walls, the sharp, metallic scratching of needles against fabric. It was constant, a frantic, rhythmic stitching that echoed from every corner of the hallway. I locked our bedroom door, but the sound of the needles did not stop. I realized then that the house was not just a structure. It was a living, breathing thing, and it was starving. The room was waiting, the thread was ready, and the house was finally preparing to feed. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the bedroom door. The house was silent now. save for the slow, rhythmic grinding of wood against wood. Then, the handle began to rotate. It moved with a deliberate, mechanical precision, turning inch by agonizing inch. I reached for the lock, but my fingers went numb. The metal was freezing, coated in a fine frost-like dust that smelled of old, stagnant air. The handle clicked. It turned fully, held there for a heartbeat, and then the door began to creak inward. There was no escape. The hallway had vanished, replaced by the sickly yellow light of the room that should not exist. The house was finished waiting. The door swung wide, and the darkness reached out to claim its prize. The day we moved into the apartment complex, the courtyard felt less like a home and more like a cage. From my kitchen window, the view was dominated by the unit directly across the way. 4B. The first time I saw him, he was standing perfectly still, his gaze locked onto our living room. Every morning at exactly 7 a.m., he raised his hand in a stiff, rhythmic wave. It was a mechanical motion. At first, I waved back, assuming he was just a lonely retiree. By the third day, the precision of his movements stopped feeling friendly. He never blinked. He never looked away, even when I turned my back to make coffee. My wife noticed it too. She started pulling the curtains shut the moment he appeared on his balcony. The space between our windows felt like a physical weight. We were being watched, and the rhythm of his wave was a countdown to something we did not yet understand. The shift from unease to terror happened at 2 a.m. I was checking the security app, a habit born of those long, sleepless nights. The screen glowed with the blue light of the television, casting long shadows across our living room. My thumb hovered over the feed, ready to close it. Then, I saw him. A figure stood by the balcony door. He did not turn the handle. He did not break the glass. He simply walked through the locked frame as if the solid metal were smoke. I blinked, sure that the pixelated image was playing tricks on my eyes. I hit the replay button. The movement was fluid, impossible, and terrifyingly deliberate. The figure passed through the barrier without a sound. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that filled the dark bedroom. I reached out to touch the screen, but my fingers only met cold glass. The reality of our home, the locks on our doors, the walls that were supposed to keep the world out, it all felt like a lie. He was inside, and the physical laws that governed our lives no longer applied. I sat in the dark, paralyzed, watching the empty room on the screen. The next morning, I marched across the courtyard and pounded on the door of 4B. My knuckles ached against the wood, but the door swung open before I could strike a second time. He stood there, his frame thin and still. He smiled, his teeth too white for the dim hallway. "I have been your neighbor since you signed the lease," he said, his voice sounding like dry leaves on pavement. "You just never noticed the extra key." I did not wait for an explanation. I turned and ran back to our unit, my breath catching in my throat. I changed every lock that afternoon and installed high-definition cameras in every corner of the house. The footage became my obsession. I watched the monitors until my eyes burned. Every night, he appeared. First in the hallway, then in the kitchen, then at the foot of our stairs. Each time, the camera caught him closer. He moved with a slow, deliberate grace that defied the locked doors. I sat in the dark, waiting. He was inside, and he was closing the distance. The motion sensor pinged my phone at 3 a.m. I stared at the screen, my heart hammering against my ribs until it felt like it might bruise my chest. The nursery feed was active. He was sitting on the edge of our daughter's bed. His hand moved in slow, deliberate strokes through her hair, a rhythmic motion that made my stomach turn. He turned his head, staring directly into the camera lens with a stillness that defied human biology. His lips moved, forming the syllables of my wife's name, the private nickname she only whispers to me in the dark. I dropped the phone, the sound of it hitting the floor echoing like a gunshot in the quiet house. I did not run to the nursery. I ran to the computer. I spent the dawn hours digging through the building's digital archives, my fingers shaking as I navigated the server logs. The truth was buried in the metadata. Unit 4B, has been vacant for 3 years. The last tenant was a man who died in our apartment. He never left. He is just waiting for the next vacancy. A rhythmic tapping sound echoed against our bedroom window. It was impossible. We were 3 stories up in the air. I looked at the baby monitor, my breath hitching in my throat. The screen flickered, the static clearing to reveal the corner of the nursery. There he stood. He was not a neighbor. He was a shadow that had been listening since the day our child was born. He did not move, yet the air in the room seemed to bend around his presence. I watched, paralyzed, as the tapping on the window synchronized with the slow, rhythmic pulse of his stillness. He had been waiting for the next vacancy, and he had found it. The screen went black, but the tapping continued, moving now from the window to the bedroom door. He was no longer waiting. He had arrived to claim the space he had been occupying all along.